Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
I was very lucky to get out. There's a lot of people that didn't get out. There's a lot of people coming down the stairs burnt up. It's bad.
Back up! Keep going!
Mom, I just want you to know I'm all right. I don't know what else to tell you. We came from the 82nd floor, and I don't know what was all right. I don't know. I hope to God you're okay.
The victims were in airplanes or in their offices. Secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror.
I'm gonna die, aren't I? No. I'm gonna die. Man, say your prayers. And we're gonna think positive because you gotta help each other get off the floor. I'm gonna die. Stay calm. God. You're doing a good job, ma'am. You're doing a good job. It's so hot. I'm burning up. Are they gonna be able to get somebody up here? Well, of course, ma'am. We're coming up for you. Well, there's no one here yet, and the floor is completely engulfed.
September 11, 2001 began as a typical Tuesday morning. In New York City and Washington, D.C., the sun was shining, the sky was clear, and the heat of summer made way for cool autumn temperatures. Men and women took to the subways, trains, and cabs to make their daily commute. Children hurried to class. No one was aware of how the world around them was about to change forever.
It's 8:52 here in New York. I'm Brian Thumble. We understand that there has been a plane crash on the southern tip of Manhattan.
I've got to interrupt you right now.
Sorry.
We want to go live right now and show you a picture of the World Trade Center.
This just in, you were looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there.
We're going to go to a picture, a live picture from New York City. Apparently a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center in New York.
We don't know if it was a commercial aircraft. We don't know if it was a private aircraft.
When you can see these pictures, it's obviously something devastating has happened.
And there was, of course, a lot of concern as to what may have happened, whether this could have been something natural, something planned, something criminal, or something accidental.
So you have no idea right now?
There's another one. Another plane just hit.
And there's more explosions right now. Hold on, people are running.
Listen, hold on just a moment. We've got an explosion inside.
The building's exploding right now. You got people running up the street.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, God.
There's another one. Oh, my goodness, there's another one.
This seems to be on purpose.
Oh, my goodness. Now it's obvious, I think, that there's a second plane just crashed into the World Trade Center. I think we have a terrorist act of proportions that we cannot begin to imagine at this juncture.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded 707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time. I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting. It really does not.
At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. The unexpected incident sparked widespread speculation about whether this was an accident or something more nefarious. Those questions were tragically answered at 9:03 when a second aircraft, United Airlines Flight 175, slammed into the World Trade Center's South Tower. The country went on high alert, but watched helplessly as two more hijacked planes plummeted from the sky. At 9:37, American Airlines Flight 77 was flown into the Pentagon, and at 10:03, United Airlines Flight 93 crashed in southern Pennsylvania.
Rescue engine 335.
You're aware of the explosion?
Yes, we're aware of the explosion. We heard that it was a plane down. Can you confirm?
We're not positive, but we are responding from supposedly the area of the 14th Street Bridge.
Engine 101, did it crash over in the area of the Pentagon? Is that correct?
We're going to need confirmation on the location.
Engine 108, we have a report of a plane crash somewhere in the area of the Pentagon. We're trying to get further. I need you to go over to 1 David.
1 responding from 1 David. Confirm plane down. 14th Street Bridge area. 1-1 Dodge, we saw it go down.
Engine 101, saw it go down.
105 is on the scene. I have a plan.
Al-Qaeda's surprise attack against the United States was the deadliest attack on U.S. soil since Pearl Harbor, and was the spark that sent the country into a war that has carried on for 2 decades. Here are some members of the Connecticut National Guard as they remember where they were on that fateful day.
I was deployed to Al Jaber Air Base in Kuwait as part of Operation Guarded Skies. So, you know, like many people, I can remember that day vividly.
I will never forget it.
I was in maintenance, working in maintenance at the time. I was on the flight line.
I was actually working out at the gym at St. Joe's College.
I was in Hamden for a statewide canine training and certification.
I was in the Tent City area at Ahmed Al Jaber Air Base.
Like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and someone in the, I think it was in the expediter truck, said, hey, you know, a plane just hit the World Trade Center.
You know, they had the news on, and, you know, you saw that a plane, an aircraft had hit the first tower.
An airman ran up to me and asked me if I'd heard that a plane had hit the World Trade Center.
At one point, I don't remember which, I think he was a West Hartford canine handler. He said, you know, a plane just hit the World Trade Center.
I was surprised because an accident like that hadn't happened since a B-25 hit the Empire State Building. And he said, no, it wasn't an accident. And he said he thought there might have been more than one.
So I walked in to like this little building that was on the flight line and watched the second plane fly into the towers. And shortly thereafter, the sirens went off on the base.
It was just breathtaking in the worst possible sense of the word.
I was actually asleep when the first airplane hit the towers because of the shift work that I was doing, but I woke up shortly after and I can remember going outside my tent and it was just a totally different posture on base and people were running around, and I saw one of our ammo troops and yelled over him and said, hey, what's going on? And he came running over and said words to me that I never expected to hear, and he said, sir, the United States is under attack.
The National Guard was primarily a strategic reserve force prior to 9/11. Most of its missions involved domestic response activities such as storm cleanup. But in the wake of the terror attacks and its close proximity to New York City, the Connecticut National Guard knew it was time to step up and fulfill its oath to protect its state and nation. Retired Brigadier General Ron Welsh and Command Sergeant Major Arthur Fredericks recall the National Guard's response in the days and months following the attacks.
First off, we weren't sure exactly what this was. It was very confusing. When the first plane hit, we thought, well, maybe it's just an aviation accident.
It wasn't, it was like kind of, I don't know, surreal, I guess. You didn't think it actually happened, you know? Until you went home and actually watched it, you know, watched the live footage, and then it was like, we all wanted to go and help.
We ended up going back to the supply area in the building, and we were able to watch some of what CNN was putting out, and then we noticed that a second event happened. At that point in time, we realized that, hey, this might be something more than an accident. This is probably a terrorist attack.
A lot of emotions, but it took a while for it to kind of like be believable. And then, you know, you get the anger, you know, who's responsible for this? What can I do to, you know, you get like like vengeance. How are we going to get back at who's responsible for this kind of thing, you know?
Within probably an hour or so, then at the time, the Adjutant General, General Cugno, got his staff together, General Zimbruski, General Cugno, and the primary staff up there, and they started to push out whatever information they had available, and they asked their logistic officer to get some ammunition, some ball ammunition, sent out to every subordinate unit that have full-time representatives. And our job was to make sure, as the senior people present in each one of our National Guard armories, that we provided security 24 hours a day around each one of those armories. Shortly into events post 9/11, General Cugno and General Zimbruski decided that they needed to develop a quick reaction force to be able to go to critical infrastructure around the state of Connecticut. The contract security and many of the municipal police departments and all the security things that were in place were becoming completely overwhelmed. So we ended up developing this very dynamic program. We were trying to get our soldiers in the Guard to be extremely flexible, mentally and physically, be able to accept a threat briefing from an FBI agent from the Joint Terrorism Task Force, process that information, the next morning wake up early and get on an aircraft and be inserted to a location day or night that they had never been to, be able to search a vehicle looking for explosive type devices and roving patrols and those kinds of things around critical infrastructure.
I was called to support protecting Millstone Power Plant. We had a schedule, but we had critical assets that we provided protection for, Millstone being one of them. Airports was another. We had soldiers patrolling at the airports. We had officers at the power plants, protect our infrastructures. But I went down to what is now Camp Net, and basically I've performed a supervisory role because we had soldiers stationed at Millstone at the access road, Humvees to block access. We had like a quick reaction force. We had roving patrols, so that go back and forth. But I would work my shift at the police department and then get off and go down to Camp Net and work the midnight shift as a supervisor for the post 9/11 response.
We ended up at Bradley and Tweed, federal airports, all the municipal airports. I believe there were 7. Millstone Nuclear Power Plant, Connecticut Yankee. We did coastal security in support of the Navy over by the subbase, electric boat, underneath the bridges, the Gold Star Bridge on the Thames River. There were also, we were on the ferry boats, and sometimes in plain clothes and sometimes in uniform, as well as the rail infrastructure became critical. The rail platforms all the way in New York City, and also on the trains with weapons, helping the Connecticut State Police and the Metro North Police.
In December, when we got to leave, we got to go on Christmas break, we got to go out off post for the first time since we started basic training. And there were armed guardsmen in every airport that we went to. I mean, and even that was, living in the United States, being able to travel by bus, by train, by aircraft, fairly freely, to see armed guardsmen at the train station and at the bus stations was very unusual. And I just wondered how many other changes the country is going to be going through. Like, was this going to be the new norm? Are we going to have to be protected 24/7? Were there going to be more attacks?
Everyone that was doing that mission basically volunteered to do it. So everyone was very much, it was like the patriotic duty. I'm going to do whatever I can, and if this is what I am going to protect and do it to the best of my ability, kind of thing.
What made it very challenging is, you're one of the traditional National Guard service members. You may be a teacher, you may be in law enforcement, or a medical professional, a student, or in the trades, carpenter, plumber, whatever, and we're asking you now to report in by 9 o'clock at night. You might have received a call that morning that we need you to report in, and we're going to be standing up one of these quick reaction forces. We get them spun up, out there deployed, and they're working with all the agencies that are out there on the ground and supplementing, whether again it's the contract security or it's local law enforcement. And you know, we've got to maintain that 24-hour-a-day coverage for an undesignated amount of time. The good news is our service members stepped up to the plate, and they were, you know, they weren't complaining. They knew that it was a mission that was necessary. So they took it on and they executed superbly.
After 9/11, the first mission set was our local critical assets, that being the airport and the nuclear power plant and things of that nature. The follow-on to that was Operation Noble Eagle, which is CONUS assets, critical infrastructure, that kind of thing. So we got that mission. One of the sites was West Point. So in 2003, I deployed with an infantry company to West Point to protect basically the cadets. The Corps of Cadets was considered a critical asset.
In the middle of the early on deployments, we were also tasked to provide security for the World Olympics, the Winter Olympics out in Utah. The Massachusetts National Guard had received the initial mission, and they were short, I want to say, a few hundred service members. So we ended up right in the middle of mobilizing our own units to go overseas and training the quick reaction forces and putting those out, training a unit to go and do that security mission out in Utah. And again, they executed superbly.
While the Connecticut National Guard's leadership tirelessly developed plans to help protect the home front, airmen from the 103rd Fighter Wing faced a different challenge. The airmen, along with their fleet of A-10 Warthogs, were deployed to Kuwait. After watching the towers fall and unable to communicate with their families back home, they knew they had to shift focus and prepare for the inevitable military response.
Coming off of Desert Shield and Desert Storm, Saddam Hussein and Iraq were continuing to be somewhat antagonistic and flying over Kuwait. So an operation was put in place, Operation Guarded Skies, to defend the no-fly zone between Iraq and Kuwait. And the 103rd Fighter Wing was over there with its A-10s, preventing and preserving that no-fly zone. Watching what happened in New York, I think, was a combination of disbelief and a combination of, and combined with anger.
It was surreal.
I quickly got out to the flight line as fast as I could, and most of the maintainers were surrounding the TV like I would imagine most Americans were that day. So as we watched everything unfold, it was interesting that a senior officer came out and actually addressed the group and said, "You should all call your families and tell them that you're not coming home."
In order for people to be able to do their jobs, they need to make damn sure that their families are secure, especially after it was determined exactly what happened.
You know, I mean, never really thought that somebody could get so deep into the United States and have such an impact. And realizing that while we had always prepared for large-scale war, that it was done so efficiently and so done without cost to the individuals who did it. So that combined to the anger of watching what was unfolding as people were, desperate in New York City to try to save their own lives. It was a very emotional day.
And it was wild because you're watching all this happening. I can't call home. You know, my two little kids, my wife was working. I'm literally thinking I'm going home, I think, in 5 days. I was supposed to be heading back for the next tour. And you're watching all this happen, and then you hear about Pennsylvania, and then you hear about the Pentagon, and you're like, holy crap, what the heck's going on?
For me personally, while the airplanes were in the air, airplanes were unaccounted for, the attacks were continuing. My wife and my two sons were actually in the air, traveling from Connecticut to Florida. So I wasn't able to contact them. I wasn't sure whether they were safe, and actually that wasn't really something I shared with anybody that day because we needed to stay focused.
You could hear boots hitting the ground outside all the tents as people were trying to figure out what should we be doing. Do our commanders, does our leadership know what's going on?
What quickly started to unfold that day were some possibilities, and one of them was that, should confirmation be found that Saddam Hussein was responsible for the attack, we knew that the United States would want to respond swiftly, and here we were, the 103rd Fighter Wing, 75 miles from the Iraqi border with our fleet of A-10s, and that we would be a part of that. At the same time, now I had a group of airmen who, were overseas, believed that they'd be overseas for a specific period of time. Some of them, expected fathers, certainly family members with civilian jobs that thought they were going home, and we needed to keep them focused operationally.
Those of us who'd been around a little bit kind of knew that, hey, the wrong thing to do is for everybody to get to their work centers. We had people on duty, let them handle what's going on. My first instinct was to do accountability for all of my guys, make sure I knew where they were, that they were, getting their gear together, and then try to get some guidance.
Dug out all our battle rattle crap, which we weren't hardly worried about that. They kicked all of the third country national TCNs off the base, and we're like, okay, here we go. This is it. We're going to be here when all this stuff starts. So it was a very different experience.
We were shifting our mission focus on the flight line. We were clearing spaces because we thought we knew the Air Force would be bringing in other combat resources pretty quickly. So we kind of quickly got over that. At least I'm doing something. It may not be the right thing. It may not even be helpful, but I'm doing something. And I know from later discussions that a lot of people, within the military and on the outside, had those opportunities to do things that sort of made them feel like they were contributing. But the vast majority of the country, didn't. And it just had to sort of basically sit there and take it and listen to the skies when there was no airplanes flying and the highways when there was no traffic and things like that, and wonder what was next. At least we had that distraction of working very hard.
I've been doing this for a very long time, and my initial reaction was, okay, whoever is responsible for this is going to pay.
One of the most remarkable things to come from the 9/11 attacks was the overwhelming sense of unity throughout the country. It didn't matter where we lived, how much money we made, or what deity we prayed to. For a short period of time, we were all New Yorkers. We were all Washingtonians. We were all Americans. For some, that meant displaying the flag with pride or raising money for the victims' families. For others, like Brigadier General Welsh and Chaplain David Larson, it meant physically going to Ground Zero and helping with relief efforts.
I'm a Baptist pastor, retired 2 years ago, but for 30 years, pastored the same church in eastern Connecticut, a little town called Voluntown. But I grew up in New York. I was a Brooklyn boy, played in the streets until I went away to college. And so when we were all devastated with the news, we saw the towers fall, I had to go home. My church understood that. So I didn't bother to talk to him. I called a key leader or two, and my wife and I packed, and I ran down to the city.
My immediate thoughts were, I need to do something. That's when I contacted one of our traditional National Guard soldiers who was working Metro North as a detective. His name was Tim Corcoran. He was a captain. And I said, hey, Tim, are you okay, first off? And he said, yes, it's pretty horrific. And I said, I need to get down there. And he said, if you can get on a Metro North, I will get you to Ground Zero and to the pile. So I got together a combat lifesaver bag, put on a jean shirt, and a backpack, and started to head down there. As a young kid, I was a volunteer firefighter, and just having trained for so many years to counter all these things and to see them happen, I just felt compelled to do something. So I went down there.
It was hard to get in. There are a lot of firefighters outside the fence who really just wanted to help, hundreds of them. And it was really hard when you really want to help and you can't. But I had enough knowledge of the area. I had my turnout gear with me. And so they sent me into Ground Zero.
I was met on the ground by another guardsman, Sergeant First Class John Duncan, who ended up working for Con Ed. So between Tim and John, those guys, to me, really represent the National Guard. They're true heroes. John was working on that pile around the clock and ended up working on it for several months in recovery efforts.
I was on the pile digging in the ashes with my hands, filling 5-gallon pails and passing them back. We were listening for any sounds of life and looking for any remains. None of that was on the top of that pile. It had all been incinerated. When it came down, the whole building was probably, what was left of it was about 70 feet high.
The pile was surreal. It was a debris field as far as you could see, acres and acres of wreckage, pulverized material, metal bent. The pile was smoldering, it was still burning. Every once in a while they would take a pause and it meant they were gonna, they were recovering some remains. Just absolutely devastating. In every direction that you looked, that's all you could see was debris and smoldering wreckage.
All my memories are gray and black because everything was gray and black. Everything was covered with ash, at least before the rains came. It was surreal, no landmarks. You'd hear some loud cracking, and then another portion of a building would come crashing down. Still a few evident fires. The ones I remember seeing were non-threatening at a fairly safe distance at that point. But it was entirely surreal. It wasn't like anything you recognize. I mean, there were buildings in the peripheral area, blown out windows and such, but it was horrific. One of the most surreal things is no office furniture, no wires, no desks, no computers, no phones. It was ashes, it was concrete, and steel. And that, I've been in a lot of fires. That was very unusual for me. So yeah, when everything's incinerated to that level, you're not going to find mortal stuff. At the time, we thought we might be walking over the graves of 30,000 people. It really didn't help much when you found out it was less than that. So I mean, the first concern was to save life, if possible. I clearly remember being outside the casualty tent. We were only recovering bodies at that point. I remember carrying remains in a black plastic bag. Of course, these are the things that tag you. So I circled the drain for about a year. If I ever saw my beloved New York skyline without the towers, I would cry. If I saw them with the towers, I would cry. If I saw anything heavy in a black plastic bag, if I saw anything falling like confetti or any loud noise, I'd say for about a year, it would physically impact me. The kindness, one of the clear memories is the kindness. You couldn't step over or across anything. There's debris everywhere. The nearest person would steady you, grab you. And New York is not very tactile, but it was that day. The Unity restaurant, I don't know if that was their name then, they changed the name I think, but they did everything they could. No power, but they had gas. And so they would cook pancakes, and they had these beautiful upholstered chairs. And we were a mess. It was the soot, it was the rain, and they just invited everybody to come in, sit in their beautiful chairs, and they fed us everything they had. Everybody we just gave what they could. I remember this, some restaurant, I don't know its name, all I know is they had a tray, like a big pan, of one of the best desserts I've ever eaten. It was chocolate something, I don't remember the details. But I pulled my glove off, there's no utensils. You just scoop some of that mess out and you lick it off your hand. I remember that was some high class New York something. And I'll never know what it was or who gave it, but Red Cross showed up. And gradually some other things came in. But a lot of what I remember was the exceptional and genuine heartfelt kindness, politeness. And some people said, oh, this won't last. And it's like, look, I'm an old dog. I know it all won't last, but we'll keep 10%. This is a peak, but you know what? We learned something here, and we're going to keep some of this.
Was 9/11 a deciding factor for you to join?
Absolutely, yeah. My father, my uncle, my grandfathers, they served in the military. When it was my turn, high school, I was going to join the Navy. My dad said no, he wanted to keep me in the private sector, but I always felt like I owed my nation something. So when 9/11 happened and while I was still kind of recovering while doing my job, pretending to be normal, I heard that there was a need for chaplains in the military, and I said, I'm in. So I was old. I just slid under the wire. But here at Bradley, the International Guard was wonderful. The day I just came to look at it to see if it's a possibility, the vice commander was being promoted to colonel, and his whole family was here for the day, and he himself drove me, a stranger, around the base for 45 minutes and showed me everything. And this base has been wonderful. Yes, I'm proud of the 103rd, sorry, not meaning to do an advertisement, but this is my experience of the Guard, and I've been here ever since.
September 11th was a call to action for many. Recruitment for the military spiked as people around the country looked to become part of something greater than themselves. Major Sean Pyre was one of those who enlisted in the aftermath of the terror attacks when his volunteer efforts in the community just didn't feel like it was enough. Major Elizabeth Turner, on the other hand, enlisted in the National Guard 6 months prior to the attacks and shipped for basic training when the world looked a lot different. These are their stories. Why did you join the National Guard?
I was bored. I was an assistant branch manager for a bank, and I just wanted something a little bit more. I signed the document on March 31st, 2001. My sister had been on drugs, and I thought for sure what I was going to do is become a DEA agent. And when I told my parents, my mom burst into tears and said, Elizabeth, I will never sleep at night if I don't know that you're safe. You know, we don't know where Heather is right now, but I could not live with myself if something were to happen to you. So I had to reevaluate, and I said, oh, I know, I'll join the National Guard, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, college benefits, I'll go back and get my master's. Easy peasy.
What did your mom think about that?
Didn't tell my parents that time. I actually woke up at Oh Dark Stupid to go up to MEPS, and only came back after I'd signed on the dotted line and told them.
And so then what was their reaction after the fact?
What could you do when I've already signed the contract? They're like, oh, okay. And compared to what I was wanting to do previously, that seemed like a much more reasonable option.
I was a young college kid, had long hair at the time that's now gone. And I remember doing laundry on the day of 9/11, being my second year in college, and just watching the planes hit on TV in our college dorm. Just kind of wondering what was happening next. I remember walking through the dorm and just kind of seeing in the common room plane hitting World Trade Center, and somebody saying, I can't even do laundry without the world going to hell in a handbasket. And then I started watching the people fall and jump. And at that point I knew it was pretty serious. The feeling of being attacked and the security I had and felt being a young high school grad, college student, of being invincible, went out the door at that moment, I felt. And I want to do something bigger and better, and not just for me, but for my family and my community. Being in Franklin, Mass, just kind of outside of Boston, I do remember basically everything going on lockdown, basically. And it's the first time I've ever experienced anything like that in my life, where basically the Metro, the T, there's curfews, we didn't know what was going on. I think Facebook didn't even exist then, so we were just kind of getting everything through text messages and whatnot. I do remember being out in the town with the locals, kind of doing a vigil for those that were being affected and kind of trying to communicate. We're in communication with our families. My mom being a nurse, being in Connecticut, they were already starting to look for volunteers to go down to the World Trade Center to basically do search and rescue and survivor, and the volunteers have already started there. Worked with the local college trying to get a blood bank going too, with the local community, with the Red Cross, and I just didn't feel like it was enough. So I immediately reached out to a few of my buddies that had been in and said, hey, you guys know a recruiter? I shipped for basic training on September 17th, which was about a day after they lifted the flight restrictions. On September 11th, I was actually working out at the gym at St. Joe's College. I had actually taken time off. I had left the bank. I was about to go to basic training, so I took 2 weeks off prior to get myself prepared.
And I just remember, the gym shut down, everybody went home, and, you were basically watching TV for the next 24 hours. And that's when it became real, that like, holy cow, when I go to basic training, this is, like, the world has completely changed as of this day.
Everybody always jokes that recruiting is like sales. It's not. The recruiters at this point were not salesmen trying to convince people to join. They were providing opportunities and knowing we needed to have the best in and also the right people in. So I think what impressed me was the fact that not only did I want to join, it was also seeing the other people at the MEPS at my ASVAB test, and in communication and going in and bringing in my paperwork with my recruiter and always seeing somebody there that was in the process with me, just at different stages. I think that's what impressed me the most too. Even all the way up to basic training, just the amount of influx of personnel they had at that time, the reception station was just overwhelmed with people and not enough cadre or drill sergeants.
It was just sort of a whirlwind because when you're going away for 10 weeks and then another 16 weeks after that, I think people around me were more reactive than I was. I think I kind of had blinders on because I had an end state. Like, I had to complete this before anything else happened. Whereas my family, my friends, people that I worked with were concerned about my personal safety and what was going to happen after I had finished this training. About 3 weeks in, the basic training company commander addressed the unit in a big auditorium. And when he came out, his face was red, his eyes were puffy, and he had the appearance of a man who'd been crying, and not just fake tears, but like legit crying. And in basic training, you rarely see company grade officers, like not at all. Your drill sergeants are E6s and E7s. So the fact that he was even addressing us at this point was pretty intense. He told us this story about the 10th Mountain Division had just deployed to Afghanistan. It had all but been decimated. And then at that point, he had us put our heads down and he said, listen, all of your follow-on travel has been canceled. No one's going to AIT. You're all going to be going to Afghanistan after this. If there's anybody out there that thinks that they can't handle this, you can get up now and go out the back door, and we won't judge you for it. But this is an opportunity for you to really understand what it is that you're getting yourself into. And about a quarter of the people in the auditorium probably stood up and left. I had tears like pouring down my face, and that was I think the first realization that I could potentially be going to war.
Obviously, you guys didn't ship to Afghanistan.
Correct.
Right after.
I mean, it definitely made me feel as to take the training a little bit more seriously. Not that I didn't, but at 28 years old, I had had a lot of personal experience. I had been working at a job. I had was living in my own place. A lot of the people that I was going through basic training with were, really young, 17, 18-year-old kids, where this is the first time that they'd even had 3 square meals a day or had clothing provided for them. This is the first time they'd had a paycheck even. So, I took it seriously, but this made me take it even more seriously because, like, you realize that muscle memory is really something that you need to be concerned about. And this wasn't just going to be me going back to Connecticut and running around Stone's Ranch 1 weekend a month or 2 weeks a year.
Before 9/11, did you ever think that you might go to war someday?
Never even crossed my mind. It had been, 20 years since we had been in, or 10 years since we had been in Kuwait the last time. And I knew that it was a possibility, but it was so far on the horizon that I didn't really think about it.
In January of 2002, I enlisted as a 31 uniform, which is now a 25 uniform, and the Connecticut Guard, down the 192 Engineering Battalion. I only signed up for 6 years, and now here, 20 years later, I'm working where the plane actually hit at the Pentagon. I'm assigned right now to HQDA G1. I work in the medical policy branch. So I don't work just for the Guard. I work for all 3 components for the Army. I work for the Deputy Chief of Staff. And every day I walk into this office when I work, under obviously a COVID environment, and I walk past the flags and the memorial quilts and the faces of those that were here that day. And one of the first things that happens when you're in processing is to sit down with Major General Stitt, Deputy Chief of Staff, Director of Military Manpower. personnel. And while I was waiting to meet the GO and have my FaceTime with him and kind of an introduction, right behind me was a blueprint. And it was the blueprint of the Pentagon on the day of the attack. And it had basically the flight path of the plane where it hit, where the secondary fuel tank explosion was, and it had a list of those who were either there, not present at the time of the attack, and where they were located, and also were they deceased, injured, or uninjured. And I didn't realize like this office was where the plane hit, because 17 miles of hallway here at the Pentagon, you know. But sitting here waiting and looking at that and just looking at the names, just kind of, I'm not gonna say freaked me out, but I think I immediately flash back to the past 20 years of all the good and all the bad and everything that's happened in my career, and people I've met and people I've helped and people, you know, I hope I've taken care of. It just kind of, it almost felt like it came complete full circle. And it was also very intimidating, because when myself and General Stitt got to talking and getting to know me and him, the first thing he told me is, every day you come to work, you're walking on hallowed ground. Every day. 3 of my coworkers were here that day when it was attacked, and they were injured, and just hearing their stories kind of made it all worth it, of why I've joined as well too. You know, I'm not a war hero or anything like that, and I never planned on being one, but it is a very surreal moment every day to come in here and step over the threshold and knowing I can make a difference still, even 20 years later, where now you have applicants that weren't even born yet and recruits that are joining that are learning about it in the history books. So it's making me feel a little old, but at the same time, it's making me feel like it's been worth it.
No one could have guessed that 9/11 would catapult the United States and its allies into one of the longest wars in recent memory. Prior to the attacks, the National Guard's focus was on training for the next conventional ground war, and that training would be put to the test once it became evident this wouldn't be a quick mission of retaliation against those responsible. Over the past 20 years, the Connecticut National Guard has deployed more than 8,000 guardsmen in support of the global war on terror to multiple countries around the globe. These are a few of their stories.
I want you all to know that America today is on bended knee in prayer for the people whose lives were lost here, for the workers who work here, for the families who mourn. This nation stands with the good people of New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut as we mourn the loss of thousands of our citizens. I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Before 9/11, you know, the National Guard was truly in that surge, reserve type force, reserve type mentality. Definitely the Cold War thought processes of, hey, when the balloon goes up, we're going to take this entire unit, and you're going to go to somewhere in Germany or Korea or, you know, wherever the emergency is.
Prior to 9/11, I mean, we were really still focused on potentially a large war over in the European theater. I mean, even our TDYs or our deployments were focused there. We were deploying to Germany, deploying over to Europe. We weren't focused on Southwest Asia at all.
Everything was focused on our near-peer adversary, which was Russia at the time. and the Cold War. So we you know, everything, all the visual modifications, the uniform mock-ups, all that stuff was geared towards the Russians. And even so, coming into the National Guard, we had, back then we had 2 shell infantry battalions and then the 102nd Infantry. We had an OP-4 unit at the time, full-time OP-4 unit, opposing force, and their uniforms were made up to look like Russians. They had mock AK-47s, AK-74s, RPGs. So, yeah, it was definitely the Russians, for sure.
Our focus was training, right? Training. And honestly, when 9/11 happened, that's when the switch got flipped to us becoming an operational force. But nobody knew what that looked like, right? Nobody knew that. So they were just with the obvious thing, like, all right, dudes with guns, put them everywhere. Off they go, right? The A-10s make sure they're ready to go.
When you think of the 9/11 attacks and the way we look at it today from a historical perspective, you know, we look at it based on the facts that we know today. So at the time when you're going through it, nobody was talking about Osama bin Laden, nobody was talking about ISIS or Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. They were a threat, but they were never thought to be at the scale of a threat that 9/11 presented. So, you know, the expectation was never that we would be in this cycle, this operational cycle that we've essentially been in for the last 20 years.
The Guard trained hard during the Cold War, trained very hard. We had some great leaders, both on the NCO and officer side, great service members. We were kind of put on the shelf, I would say, post 9/11, and we all wanted to contribute in any way that we could. And the Guard always did that, responded to natural and man-made disasters, you know, the wildfires and floods and blizzards and things like that. But in terms of combat operations, there were some units that were deployed in the Guard to Vietnam, but not many. So we were put on the shelf. When 9/11 happened, to the credit of the active component, I think they realized very quickly they couldn't support everything that needed to be supported. So we very quickly started to get equipment, we started to get additional training opportunities, and things really started to ramp up.
By the time we left West Point, we had a very highly proficient infantry company, trained to a much higher level than a traditional M-Day infantry unit would be.
We were one of the first Connecticut National Guard units to deploy in 2003 because the Army still hadn't spun up to what they're doing, you know, now. So we ended up getting tasked to go for what became the invasion of Iraq, you know, in 2003. But we deployed in February of 2003. But so all that started back right after 9/11. They took our A-10s, put an experimental targeting pod on them. So we went out to Vegas and made sure that all worked. The Lightning pod. Added this capability to the A-10 for the sole purpose of taking out Scuds, honestly, and prepared us to deploy to go do that with our sister unit, which was the 104th at the time, because they had A-10s also. So we combined the 2 units into one unit called the Damn Yankees, and we deployed, you know, so now we're just not training anymore, right? We're no shit going somewhere and getting ready to into combat.
With all the noble legal stuff, they kind of put it on the soldiers that had already deployed had the option to go. And so I remember meeting, you know, we're going through like pre-mob, and the guys that had already deployed, including myself, didn't have to go again. And so essentially my guys were like, hey, we all want to go, but we want you to go, you know. So we all like collectively agreed as a company, infantry company, to go. So that's what we did. I pretty much had 99% of my previously deployed company sign up to go again to Afghanistan for 06-07.
And I met a team of senior NCOs and officers. We arrived up in the Kabul area and assembled the rest of our team. And then we got pushed out to eastern Afghanistan and ended up, at that point in time, joining a bunch of Marine senior members, also became embedded team trainers. So I was the commander of this team of between 60 and 70 senior officers and enlisted members. And our mission was to train and mentor the Afghan National Army. We were assigned to an infantry brigade, and I was to mentor an Afghan general officer as a colonel, an infantry colonel. And we were to, again, train them, mentor them, and then shoulder to shoulder stand with them during combat operations.
I was fortunate to be offered the opportunity to be an operations NCO, and my commander was the operations officer for Fort Operating Base that my platoon is going to be assigned to, one of my platoons. I had 2 platoons in southern Afghanistan and 1 in western Afghanistan, and that was it. The rest of the battalion was in eastern Afghanistan.
We went out in support of a real poor village. We were doing they call it a medical cap. It's providing humanitarian services. And our mission was to provide security around this medical aid station that was established by the U.S. And to see the hundreds of people that were lined up, and this was supporting the females of Afghanistan that had never received medical care in their life, and just lining up and begging to see a healthcare provider, left a tremendous impression on me. The human suffering that the average encounter daily in Afghanistan.
We were basically totally detached and broken away from the rest of the battalion. A short time later, they identified the risk associated with just one infantry platoon being so remote in western Afghanistan. Like literally, it would take hours to get air support, or medevac or things of that nature. It was, it was a long flight from Bagram to there, or even from Kandahar to there. So they sent us from the 102nd, the scout platoon. So I had the scout platoon and I had a line platoon, and then they sent the battalion mortars as well. And we also got Italian Special Forces on our base as well. So we got an Alpine Ranger from the Italian Army platoon, and we got a JTAC Special Forces team to do ground-to-air stuff for us. They used to go out on all our missions with us, which was a great force multiplier when you had someone that had that expertise in communicating with the aircraft to get air support whenever we were in contact. So we had a pretty robust footprint.
We got paired up with 10th Mountain, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, and 2 Marine Corps infantry battalions. Fantastic battalions, 2-3 out of Hawaii and 1-3 out of Hawaii. So when we would go out into the operational area, these would be very large task forces of about 1,000+ service members between the Afghan National Army, the Marine Corps, and the U.S. Army, along with all the other enablers from both governmental and non-governmental agencies. These are extremely complex operations. On one particular evening, we were inserted into a place highly contested area called the Korengal Valley. The Soviets lost a tremendous amount of service members when they were on the ground in Afghanistan in the late 70s. We got inserted into this area. We were trying to take down some of the insurgents that were making a bunch of IEDs and creating a lot of issues in the area. We had gathered some pretty good intelligence, and a large task force was inserted. So again, our Afghan counterparts were shoulder to shoulder with us. There were multiple aircraft inserted, CH-47s. A lot of artillery preparation took place to clear those landing zones prior to us getting inserted at night, along with Predators being up, B-52s, AC-130 gunships, A-10s. All those other enablers were in place. A lot of logistical support was well positioned, medical support, all the other enablers were there. We were on the ground for a relatively short amount of time, and our command post was hit with direct fire. The attack was repelled, a few were wounded. We were able to move early the next morning down to one of our objective areas and link up with another big unit there. While that was all happening, though, there were multiple villages that had operations, combat operations, being conducted in those villages looking for insurgents.
And we did a lot, probably did about 1,200 security missions. We do short-range security missions, at least one a day and at least one at nighttime, and that was just to keep the Taliban at bay. They never knew when we were going to patrol or where we're going to be. We do fire missions too with our mortars and let them know that we had some pretty significant indirect fire capabilities. And we did probably about 60 or 65 long-range multinational missions. When we did a large mission, we did it with Spanish or Portuguese or Italian soldiers. So you had to work within the limitations of those support forces. So the Portuguese might have different parameters than the Spanish, than the Italians, and then I'm dealing with Italian air support versus American air support for moving troops and that kind of thing.
My oldest son, Stephen, was a corporal, and he was in the 102nd Infantry, and I had no idea that the 102nd Infantry was going to be mobilized to go to Afghanistan. So I got a message after I was on the ground for several months saying, "Hey Dad, I think I'm going to see you there." And I couldn't understand what he meant, so I had to get a little clarification. And sure enough, I was coming out of an operation. It was his 21st birthday, the 15th of April, 2006, and received a radio call, and it was Stephen on the other end of the radio. And he was about, at the time, probably about 50 or 60 kilometers away. Wow. And eventually we ended up linking up a short amount of time after that.
Everyone did tower duty, regardless of what your rank was, what your duty position was, because we had no other choice. It was just where we were, and, you know, if we were going to conduct missions, that's just what it had to be. When we got the 2nd Platoon, we could do a lot more further outreach, get to those villages and communities within our region and have more greater impact, you know, because our goal was to build, you know, to help the Afghan National Army, the Afghan National Police, even the Afghan Border Patrol, because the closest thing to us was the Iranian border, and so the Border Patrol was another piece of what we did too. So my guys would go down to the Provincial Coordination Center and train the Afghan National Police. It was a great experience, and I'll tell you, you know, it doesn't matter what country you're from, a soldier's a soldier. You know, I saw tremendous heroics from every single nation state that we served with over there. So. Good experience.
I cannot believe still, looking at the numbers, you know, I believe it's 7,212 service members deployed since 9/11. You know, 23 units, multiple countries around the world. I would have never thought that when I ended up in the Guard, coming out of the active Army, that magnitude and scope of deployment would happen.
One of the most remarkable things about this conflict is its longevity. The Connecticut National Guard now has soldiers and airmen who have never known a United States that wasn't at war. As this new generation of warrior begins to take its place in our formation, we asked more seasoned guardsmen about their impressions of these young troops.
I think we see a different caliber. I think we see a lot of airmen and soldiers coming forward that, you know, not only are they stepping forward for the patriotic reasons, but they're stepping forward because they see the National Guard as an opportunity to improve their own lives and the lives of their families. So, you know, the ability to come in and have a free college tuition and then take that knowledge and apply it back as a way giving back to the country is extremely important to the young people. I'm not sure it was extremely important to my generation, but I think 9/11 had a lot to do with that. And I think we look at the nation differently. I think their parents look at the nation differently, and I think service is something considerably more honored today than it probably was 30 years ago.
You know, people want to bash millennials a lot and say that they're selfish and they're, you know, self-centered. They actually, I think, care about the world as a whole and how they fit into it a lot more than we do.
When I enlisted, being deployed in harm's way was a possibility versus the people who've enlisted since then, who've done that awesome thing. It's not a probability, it's a definite. You are going to go sooner or later in your career, even if you just do one enlistment. And to me, that's just fantastically awesome. I'm always moved by our younger soldiers and airmen who've raised their right hand, knowing that while the country's not at war, the military is, and they've become part of it.
So it's very inspiring for someone like me that's been around for a long time to see these young soldiers come in and just want to give it everything they got.
I was born September 14th, 2001.
I was born June 27th, 2002. I was born on March 16th, 2002.
I was born January 7th, 2002.
I was born December 11th, 2002.
I was born on November 12th, 2001. I immigrated to America on September 9th of 2013, and I learned about 9/11 2 days later.
In elementary school, we'd write letters to troops overseas, and we would always learn about 9/11, like in history class. When September 11th was around for like that week, they'd dedicate the whole week and have us do a bunch of posters and stuff.
My first me learning about 9/11 was actually my 5th grade. I was in school.
It was sometime in elementary school. It was like pretty early on.
It was a lot of movies that introduced me to it, as well as every year the memorial. And my father told me about it a lot.
It was definitely personal experiences through my dad and a lot of my teachers.
I remember feeling angry as well. I didn't understand the repercussions of the terrorist attack and how it affected America and the security of America. And as I got older, that's when I started to realize why all this happened, why they did it, and why we continue to fight.
5th grade to about 8th grade is they were still telling us about 9/11, what happened, first responders, how everything went down. And like they'll show us audio recordings of people on the plane, people in the towers, and stuff like that.
As it progressed into high school as well, they got a lot more complex, and it became more specific of who was the bad guys and who was the good guys.
You got to like sort of understand a lot more why it happened, not necessarily like what happened that day, because I mean you know what happened.
I always remember my dad would talk about like how they all just remember where they were during it, and how it was just like it changed everything. From used to be able to just walk on an airplane, which I've never experienced, but now there's like 6 different levels of security.
But once I reached high school, it was more of a day to remember.
It was a lot more numbers and the reason why we fight now.
It's a little surreal that like it's been going on this long, but still just happy to be a part of it and do my part. I wasn't there for 9/11, but also a factor of me joining the military, you know, of me being patriot and wanting to serve the country. And, you know, yeah, 9/11 was definitely one of the reasons why I joined the military.
I understood that we were still at war when I enlisted, and I didn't expect to be deployed, but I wanted at least a chance to deploy and help in the effort.
And sometimes I feel very proud to be wearing, you know, a deployment patch and serving my country the right way. And, you know, being here is an important, you know, part of my military career.
For me, it just makes me feel like I'm part of like something that's a lot bigger than me. Like just being a part of like a team, helping like a cause that's been going on for the last 20 years, coming up soon.
I feel like I'm doing my part out here, because I don't think it's gonna end here for like service to the country and whatnot. Like definitely want to get back. I want to get more involved with the National Guard.
September 11th was a day that changed history and really changed the National Guard. But we must never forget the nearly 3,000 innocent lives that were lost that day on a brutal attack on our nation, and really an attack on our democracy. We must never forget the thousands of lives lost and sacrificed with the subsequent global war on terror. And we must never forget the commitment and the resolve and the sacrifices of our Gold Star families. The Connecticut National Guard was part of the initial response to secure the homeland. I remember initially we staged equipment at Sherwin Island State Park in Westport, Connecticut, initially there to assist the New York City response. We mobilized for security operations at the Connecticut's airports and at our railways. We also deployed for Operation Noble Eagle, some of the first deployments, deploying to military bases throughout the East Coast. For the last 20 years, the Guard has transformed from a strategic ready reserve to an operational ready force and the primary combat reserve of both the Army and the Air Force. Since 9/11, the Connecticut National Guard has deployed well over 8,000 members, many with 2, 3, even 4 tours overseas. We now have Guardsmen that fight the war against terror who were just barely born on 9/11 and who specifically joined to combat the war on terror. As we sit here today, we currently have over 900 currently deployed throughout the world, ready and defending this great nation. Our Guardsmen and women are resilient and ready, selflessly serving our Guard, this great state, and our nation. 9/11 has strengthened and transformed the Guard and inspired our next generation of warriors to volunteer to defend those freedoms and democracy of our founding fathers.